Her mother had died in February. By April, there was nothing left to stay for. She had packed one trunk and a canvas bag. She had sold the sewing machine and the 2 chairs that had been her mother's. She had paid 3 months ahead on a debt that was not hers and walked out of that house in Winnipeg on a Tuesday morning without looking back at it. The letter had come in January. A man in Saskatchewan, a farmer, needed a capable woman to help manage his property. His wife had passed the previous autumn. He had 200 acres, some cattle, and a house that required attention. He was not asking for sentiment. He was asking for someone who could work. She had written back the same day she received it. The train took 2 days. She sat by the window and watched the land change, the city giving way to small towns, the small towns giving way to nothing. Just grass and sky and the occasional stand of trees that looked as though they had been placed there by accident. She had seen prairie before, but not like this. This was the kind of land that did not apologize for itself. He met her at the station in Mossbank. She recognized him from the description she had been given by the woman at the placement office. Tall, somewhat older, a gray coat that had been good once. He did not smile when he saw her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a fence line he is not sure will hold. She did not smile either. She looked at him the same way. He said his name was Connell. She said hers. He picked up the large trunk and she carried the bag herself. He did not offer to take it and she did not expect him to. They walked to the wagon without talking. The horse was a bay mare, steady-looking, with 1 white foot. She noted that. A horse that stands still at a station, while the train comes in, is a horse that has been handled right. The drive out took nearly an hour. He told her the basic facts of the place. The house had 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen added on the east side. The barn held 4 cows and a young bull. There were chickens, 23 of them, in a coop behind the house. The well was good. The root cellar was deep. He said there was enough put up from the previous year to last through summer if she was careful. She asked what careful meant to him. He said it meant not wasting. She said she understood that. He did not say anything else for a while. She watched the road. The land here was flat in a way that felt deliberate, as though something had pressed it down a long time ago and it had decided to stay that way. The grass was still pale from winter. Here and there she could see where the snow had only just pulled back, dark wet patches in the low places. When the property came into view, she kept her face still. She had learned to do that, to take something in fully before letting it show. The house was smaller than she had expected. The barn was in decent repair. The fence lines looked maintained, but the chicken coop was leaning noticeably to one side, and the kitchen garden was nothing but matted dead growth from last year, untouched. There was a wagon wheel propped against the house that looked as though it had been there a long time. The yard had the feel of a place that had been managed by a man alone, functional in the ways that kept animals alive, neglected in the ways that did not immediately matter. She climbed down from the wagon before he came around to help. She stood in the yard and turned slowly, just once, taking in the whole of it. The direction the coop leaned, the slope of the ground toward the east, where the light would come in the morning and where it would not. He was watching her. She said she would need to look at the coop before the week was out. He said the coop was fine. She said it was leaning. He said it had been leaning for 2 years, and the chickens didn't mind. She did not argue. She just looked at it once more, and then looked at him, and then walked to the house. The house was cold but clean. His wife had kept it that way, and he had kept it that way after her. She could see that in the way things were put away, not neatly, exactly, but consistently. Everything had a place and was in it. A man who keeps things in their places even when there is no one to keep them for is a man of a particular kind. She thought about that while she lit the stove. He had left her to it. She heard him in the barn for a long time, longer than the animals needed, which told her he did not quite know what to do with another person in the house. She put water on for tea. She opened every cupboard and looked at what was there. She looked in the root cellar and came back with potatoes and an onion and some dried beans that were still good. She made a meal that was plain and enough and had it ready when he came in. He looked at the table. He sat down. He said it smelled all right. She sat across from him and they ate without talking much. He asked once if she had made the trip all right. She said she had. He asked if the accommodations were suitable. She said they were. He thanked her for the meal. She said it was no trouble. After supper, he went and sat by the window with a pipe. She washed the dishes and cleaned the stove and thought about the garden. She had decided somewhere on that train that she would not think too far ahead. She would look at what was in front of her and do the thing that needed doing. That was all. The rest would either work out or it would not, and worrying about it in advance would not change the outcome. The first week, she learned the shape of the place. She rose before him and had the stove going by the time he came in for breakfast. She fed the chickens herself, counting them each morning, checking the coop for any signs of weakness in the wood or the wire. She walked the fence lines on the south side and found 2 places where the wire had loosened. She tied them back herself with what she found in the barn. She did not tell him she had done it. He noticed anyway and said nothing. There was a woman in town named Mrs. Atchison who had been sending meals out twice a week since Connell's wife had passed. She came by on the Thursday of that first week and looked at the place with the particular attention of someone who had been keeping track of its decline. She was a practical woman in her 60s with a good handshake. She gave the kitchen a once-over that was not quite inspection, but close to it. And then she looked at the woman and nodded, a single firm nod, as if she had made up her mind about something. She said she supposed the meals could stop now. The woman said she supposed they could. Mrs. Atchison said there was a dry goods order she could add to if she was sending into town. She wrote down the name of the supplier. She said Connell knew where to find her if anything was needed. She thanked her and meant it. After Mrs. Atchison left, she added 3 items to the order: seeds, mostly, turnip and carrot, and a small amount of parsley. Not much. Enough to start. The coop she fixed on the 9th day. She had looked at it long enough to understand the problem. One of the main support posts had rotted at the base and the whole east side had sunk. It had not collapsed because the wire was holding it, but the wire would not hold it much longer. She found good lumber in the back of the barn, 3 pieces that had been cut and left. She found the tools. She dug out the rotted post in the morning and set the new one in the afternoon, packing it properly, giving it time to settle before she attached the framing back to it. Connell came to watch for a while. He did not offer to help. She did not ask him to. When she was done, the coop stood straight. Not perfect. The roof still had a low corner, but straight enough to last. The hens seemed to notice. They settled differently in it. That evening, less crowded toward the high side. She came in for supper with dirt on her hands and her sleeves rolled. He said he thought she was going to let it go another season. She said it would have gone over by August. He didn't say anything to that. He handed her the towel from its hook by the sink. It was, she understood later, a kind of acknowledgement. Not effusive, not the sort a person would recognize from the outside, but she recognized it. The first winter was the measure of it. She had known hard winters. Winnipeg did not produce people who were surprised by cold. But Saskatchewan cold was a different thing. It came in October and it stayed. The temperature dropped to 40 below for 8 days in January, and the wind was a problem in a way that was almost personal, finding every gap in the house, every place where the insulation had thinned. She chinked the gaps herself with a mixture she learned from a book she found in the bottom of his trunk, a farming manual from 1908 that had been used hard. She read it at night while he sat with his pipe. She learned from it what she could and discarded the rest. The cattle came through. The chickens came through. They lost 1 cow in December, a young heifer who had not been strong going into the cold, and he was quiet about it for several days. She did not try to fill that silence. She understood it. The loss of an animal on a place like this was not a small thing. It was feed and labor and money, and also something harder to name, something that came from watching over a thing and having it die anyway. She made sure the meals were good that week. She did not make them richer or more varied. That would have been false comfort, but she made them reliably. Same time, same quality. That was the kind of thing that held. By February, they had found a way to be in the house together that did not require constant navigation. He knew she would have the stove going at 5:30. She knew he would be in from the barn by 5:30. He knew she kept the flour on the left side of the shelf and the salt on the right, and did not like them moved. She knew he went deaf to conversation when he was looking at figures and needed to be spoken to directly. She learned other things too. He had been a good farmer once, better than average. before 2 dry summers and a cattle disease had taken most of what he'd built. The land was still good. He knew that, but his confidence in it had been shaken. He managed it now with a kind of caution that was close to pessimism. He planted less than he could. He did not take on new stock when he should have. He sat with what he had and waited, she thought, for the next thing to go wrong. She understood that kind of caution. She had lived it herself, but she did not share it. In March, I asked him about the South Field. He said it hadn't been seeded in 3 years. She asked why. He said it was low ground. It held water in wet years and baked in dry years and had given him more trouble than it was worth. She walked it herself that afternoon. She walked the whole of it, slowly, reading the ground the way he had never quite taught himself to read it. The color of the soil, the drainage, where the water had pooled and where it had moved through. She dug down with her boot heel in 3 places. She stood at the far end and looked back at the house and the barn and the arrangement of things. She came in for supper and said she thought the South Field could take oats if they managed the drainage on the north edge. She described what she had seen. She was precise about it. He listened. He did not argue. He said it was a risk. She said all of it was a risk. He looked at the table for a while. Then he said he would think on it. He was thinking on it for 3 days. She did not bring it up again. She had said what she thought. That was enough. It was his land and his decision, and she would not push past what she had already said. On the 4th day, he said they should order the seed. She went to town with Mrs. Atchison's nephew, a young man named Prentice, who drove the supply run twice a month and was reliable about it. She ordered the oat seed and she ordered extra fencing, and she spent what needed to be spent carefully and brought back receipts for everything. The seeding took 4 days. She worked beside him. They did not talk much, but they worked in a way that did not require talking. Falling into a rhythm, one task leading to the next, each of them anticipating what the other needed without having to ask. It was the kind of thing that could not be faked and could not be forced. It either developed or it didn't. She noticed it developing. She did not say anything about it. In June, a man came by from the neighboring property. A Scotsman named Havelock, who had been in the territory for 20 years and knew Connell from before. He stayed for coffee and looked at her with the frank appraisal of a man who has not decided what to think yet. He said he heard Connell had taken on a housekeeper. Connell said that was one way to put it. Havelock looked at her again. He asked if she had come from the city. She said she had come from Winnipeg. He said that didn't explain the fencing on the south edge. She said she had looked at the drainage and made a decision. He looked at the fencing again, and then at her, and then at Connell. He said something in a low voice she didn't catch, and Connell's expression shifted, not quite amusement, but near enough to it. After Havelock left, she asked what he had said. Connell said he had said she was wasted on chickens. She looked out at the yard. The coop stood straight. The garden was 2 months in and producing. The South Field had come up even, the oats pale green in their rows. She said she didn't think she was wasted on anything. He looked at her for a moment. Then he went to the barn. The oats came in well, better than he had expected. Not a spectacular yield, but a solid one. The kind that meant the field was worth the trouble and would improve with working. He brought in the crop in August with help from Havelock's 2 sons, boys named Graham and Douglas, who were strong and worked without complaint. She fed them lunch and supper both days and packed them something for the road home. Graham, the older one, thanked her with the earnest politeness of someone who has been raised right. The money from the oats went a long way. He paid down a debt she had not known about until he told her, which she understood as a kind of trust. He said there was enough left to think about a second cow in the spring, maybe a better laying breed for the hens. She said the leghorns were reliable for laying if he could get good stock. He said he knew someone who kept leghorns near Swift Current. She said that was worth a conversation. They were sitting at the table after supper. The lamp was between them. Outside it was August dark, late and thick, and through the window she could see nothing but the faint outline of the barn. He said he appreciated the way she had handled the South Field. He said it plainly. The way a man says something he has been thinking about for longer than the moment suggests. She said she had just read the land. He said his wife had done that too. Not with fields, but with people. She could read a person the way some read the ground. It was the first time he had spoken of her voluntarily. She did not fill the space after it. He picked up his cup. He said she had been gone 14 months now. She nodded. He said some days it still caught him sideways. She said she understood that. She said her mother had been gone since February, and there were still mornings when she reached for the sound of her in the other room. He looked at the lamp. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "The place looks better than it has in 3 years." She let that sit for a moment. Then she said she thought it had good bones. It just needed to be worked right. He said he thought that might be true of more than the land. She looked at him. He looked back. It was the kind of look that meant something without requiring anything immediate of either of them. She got up and cleared the cups. She went to the window and looked out at the yard. The coop stood even in the dark. The garden she could not see, but she knew where it was and what was in it and what it would give them come fall. The second autumn she organized the root cellar in a way that made sense for the winter ahead. She labeled everything. She built a simple shelf from scrap wood that doubled the usable space. She put up more preserves than the year before. Not because she had planned to, but because the garden had been better, and waste was still waste whether the season had been kind or not. Connell had started asking her opinion on things before deciding them. Not always, not in any formal way, but she noticed it. He would mention something at supper. A price he'd been quoted for feed, whether it was worth patching the barn roof now or waiting for spring. And he would say it in a way that was open to response, not closed. She gave her opinion when she had one and kept quiet when she did not. He had learned to tell the difference. Mrs. Atchison came by for tea in October and walked around the yard the way she had in that first week, with eyes that missed nothing. She stood at the garden and looked at the late squash still on the vine. She looked at the coop and the straight line of it. She said the place had come up well. The woman said they'd had a good season. Mrs. Atchison looked at her with the same direct attention she'd had that first day. She said it was more than the season. She did not argue with that. By the second winter, she knew the land the way she had known the streets of her neighborhood in Winnipeg. Not consciously, but with the kind of knowing that is in the body. She knew where the drifts built first and where the wind came off the field at an angle that made the cold worse. She knew which corner of the barn held heat best and which the cattle preferred on the worst nights. She knew that Connell slept badly in January, and that when he slept badly, he was short in the mornings in a way that was not personal and did not require a response. She learned to be a different kind of quiet than she had been in her mother's house. That quiet had been careful, managed. This one was easier. It was the quiet of two people who have learned to trust the arrangement they have made. In February, the dead month, the worst of it, he came in one evening and sat at the table and put his hands flat on it the way a man does when he has something to say and is deciding how to say it. She waited. She did not prompt him. He said he had been thinking about the arrangement. He said it had worked out better than he had expected. He said he wanted to make it more than it was if she was willing. She looked at him. She looked at his hands on the table. She looked at the room, at the shelf she had built in the corner, the curtain she had sewn for the window, the lamp that was in a slightly different place than where it had been when she arrived. She said she would need to think on it. He nodded. He got up and went to the window and stood there the way he did sometimes, not looking at anything in particular, just letting the outside in. She thought on it for 2 days. She thought about what staying would mean and what it would cost and what it would not cost. She thought about her mother and what she would have said, which she could not know exactly, but could approximate from knowing her. She thought about the south field and the coop and the second winter coming through and the quiet that had settled in the house like something earned. On the third day she told him yes. He nodded again. He said he was glad of it. That was all. For then, there was no ceremony in it, but some things did not need ceremony. They needed only the right words said plainly between the right people, in a kitchen in Saskatchewan in February, with the wind outside and the lamp between them. In the spring, he wrote to the man in Swift Current about the leghorn hens. He got good stock, 8 pullets and a rooster, and she integrated them into the flock carefully, giving the old hens time to adjust. The egg production that summer was better than any year he had record of. She expanded the garden to the west. She added a row of potatoes and one of kale, and a small bed of herbs she had been wanting since the first summer. She did not ask. The ground was there, and the fence post to extend it was there, and the work was hers to do. He came and looked at the extended bed one evening and said nothing. He went and got the hoe from the barn and spent an hour breaking up the soil at the far end where she had not yet turned it. She watched him from the kitchen window. She did not go out. When he came in, she had supper ready. They ate. He said the kale would do well. In the north end, the soil was better there. She said she had thought the same thing. He said she should move it. She said she would in the morning. Havelock came by again in the summer, this time with his wife, a small, careful woman named Elspeth, who had been in the territory almost as long as he had. She brought a cake in a tin and walked the yard with Connell and Havelock while the woman showed her the kitchen. There was nothing to show. Exactly. It was a working kitchen, not a display. But Elspeth looked at it with genuine attention, the way one practical woman looks at another's arrangements. She noticed the shelves. She noticed the labels on the root cellar jars. She noticed the curtain at the window and the way the stove had been blacked recently. She said the place had been kept well. The woman said she had tried to keep it useful. Elspeth looked at her for a moment. She said that was the right word for it. Useful. Outside, the men were at the fence, talking about something. Havelock was gesturing toward the south field. Connell was standing with his hands in his pockets in the way that meant he was pleased, but not saying so. She made tea. Elspeth sat down. They talked for an hour about things that mattered: seed prices, winter preparation, the particular difficulty of the clay soil on the North Quarter, in the direct way of women who have no patience for the other kind of talk. By the time the men came in, she felt she had made a friend, if that was the word, or something close to it. Havelock ate 2 pieces of his wife's cake and said the oats on the south field were the best looking in the district. Connell said they'd had good management. Havelock looked at the woman. He said he expected they had. That fall, she stood at the edge of the property, the far south corner, where the ground dipped slightly before meeting Havelock's fence line, and looked back at the house and the barn and the coop and the garden. The late afternoon light was in it the way it gets in September, low and particular, making everything more itself. The coop stood straight. The garden had been put to bed properly. Everything pulled, the beds turned, mulched against the cold. The barn needed paint on the south face, but the structure was sound. The house had a new piece of stovepipe they had put in August, and the kitchen lean-to had been re-chinked before the cold came. It was not what she had imagined when she had sat on that train with her one trunk and her canvas bag. She had not imagined anything, if she was honest. She had been too tired for imagining. She had only thought about what was in front of her and done the next thing. But this was what had come of it. This particular yard, this particular light, this particular piece of prairie that had been worked back from the edge of something, and was now doing what it was meant to do. She heard him come up behind her. He stopped a few feet back and looked out at the same view. He said the south field would carry more next year if the weather held. She said she thought it would. He said Havelock had asked if they'd considered taking on the quarter section to the east. The man who held it was thinking of selling. She turned that over in her mind. She thought about the drainage on that side, which she had looked at from the fence line once. She thought about what they had managed in 2 years with what they had, and what a 300 acres would mean in work and in risk, and in what it could give back. She said they should look at it before winter. He said he thought so too. A gopher moved through the stubble at the field's edge and disappeared. The wind came across from the west, steady and level, the way it did at this hour in September. She did not look at him. He did not look at her. They both looked at the land. That was enough. Some things did not need more than that.